Bullies shaved the quiet kids' eyebrows. He made their hair fall out with a single glance. Marcus Rivera sat in the back corner of Jefferson High's chemistry lab, hunched over his notebook as he carefully copied molecular diagrams from the whiteboard. His thick-rimmed glasses kept sliding down his nose, and every few minutes he'd push them back up with a nervous habit that had become second nature. At 17, Marcus was the kind of student who blended into the background. Average height, thin build, with unruly dark hair that never seemed to cooperate despite his mother's attempts to tame it each morning. The lab buzzed with the usual chatter of third-period chemistry, but Marcus remained focused on his work. He'd transferred to Jefferson High just 3 weeks ago when his family moved from New Mexico to this small Colorado town, and he was still adjusting to being the new kid. Back home, he'd had friends, a routine, a place where he belonged. Here, he was nobody, just another face in the hallway, invisible and forgettable. "Hey, Four Eyes!" The voice cut through his concentration like a knife. Marcus looked up to see Tyler Brennan standing beside his lab table, flanked by his usual crew. Tyler was everything Marcus wasn't. Tall, athletic, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confident smirk that came from never being told no. As the star quarterback and son of the town's most successful car dealership owner, Tyler ruled Jefferson High's social hierarchy with an iron fist. "I'm talking to you, freak," Tyler continued, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. His friends, Jake Morrison and Connor Walsh, snickered behind him like loyal hyenas waiting for scraps. Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment as other students turned to stare. "Sorry, what do you need?" he asked quietly, hoping to diffuse the situation before it escalated. "What I need," Tyler said, leaning closer, "is for you to stop breathing so loud. It's distracting." Jake burst into laughter at this, as if it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Mrs. Patterson, the chemistry teacher, was busy helping students at the front of the class and seemed oblivious to the confrontation brewing in the back. Marcus had learned in his short time here that teachers at Jefferson High had a remarkable ability to look the other way when it came to Tyler's behavior. "I wasn't," Marcus started, but Tyler cut him off. "Wasn't what? Breathing? Because you definitely were." Tyler reached over and flicked Marcus's glasses off his face. They clattered to the floor, and Marcus immediately dropped to his knees to retrieve them, his face burning with humiliation. When he stood back up, the 3 boys were already walking away, Tyler calling over his shoulder, "Try to keep it down, New Mexico." The rest of the class period passed in a blur of shame and anger. Marcus kept his head down, acutely aware of the whispers and stares from his classmates. This wasn't the first incident since he'd arrived at Jefferson High, and he had a sinking feeling it wouldn't be the last. What none of them knew, what Marcus had never told anyone at his new school, was that he came from a long line of curanderos, traditional healers who possessed abilities that most people would dismiss as superstition. His grandmother had spent years teaching him the old ways, the ancient knowledge passed down through generations of his family. She'd warned him about using his gifts carelessly, about the responsibility that came with such power. "Con gran poder viene gran responsabilidad, mijo," she'd always said. "Never use what you've been given to harm others, only to protect and heal." But as Marcus walked through Jefferson High's crowded hallways after chemistry class, his grandmother's words felt distant and hollow. All around him, students laughed and talked in groups, while he navigated the social maze alone, invisible except when Tyler and his friends decided to make him their entertainment. The cafeteria was always the worst part of Marcus's day. The massive room echoed with hundreds of conversations, the clatter of trays, and the occasional shout from across the room. Marcus had learned to time his arrival carefully. Too early, and he'd be alone at a table like a target. Too late, and all the safer spots would be taken. He grabbed a tray and moved through the lunch line, choosing a turkey sandwich and an apple before scanning the room for a place to sit. The popular kids dominated the center tables, with Tyler's group holding court at the largest one. Marcus had learned to avoid that entire section of the cafeteria, but even sitting along the walls didn't guarantee safety. He'd just taken a seat at a small table near the windows when he felt a presence behind him. "Well, well, look who's eating all by himself again." Tyler's voice was unmistakable. Marcus tensed, his grip tightening on his sandwich. "Maybe he's waiting for his imaginary friends," Jake added with a laugh. "Or maybe," Connor chimed in, "he's too weird for anyone to want to sit with him." Marcus continued eating, trying to ignore them, but Tyler wasn't done. He walked around to face Marcus directly, his expression mockingly sympathetic. "You know what your problem is, New Mexico? You're boring. You sit there like a ghost, never talk to anyone, never do anything interesting. It's actually kind of sad." "I'm just trying to eat lunch," Marcus said quietly, not looking up from his tray. "Just trying to eat lunch," Tyler repeated in a high-pitched, mocking voice. "God, even your voice is boring. Do you ever get excited about anything? Do you even have feelings?" The cafeteria around them had grown quieter, other students sensing drama and turning to watch. Marcus felt the familiar heat of embarrassment creeping up his neck, but something else was stirring inside him too. A strange, tingling sensation he'd felt before, usually when his emotions ran high. Tyler must have noticed Marcus's discomfort, because his grin widened. "Oh, look at that! I think Four Eyes is getting upset. Are you going to cry? Are you going to run to Mommy?" The tingling sensation grew stronger, and Marcus found himself thinking of his grandmother's lessons about energy, about the connections between all living things, about how strong emotions could amplify natural abilities. He pushed the thoughts away, focusing instead on his breathing, on staying calm. "Leave me alone," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What was that?" Tyler leaned closer, cupping his ear dramatically. "I didn't hear you, New Mexico." "I said leave me alone," Marcus repeated, slightly louder this time. Tyler straightened up, laughing. "There we go! The ghost can speak!" He turned to his friends. "Did you guys hear that? He actually has a voice." Just then, Mr. Rodriguez, one of the lunch monitors, approached their table. "Everything okay over here, boys?" Tyler immediately switched on his charm, flashing his perfect smile. "Oh yeah, Mr. Rodriguez, everything's great. We were just talking to Marcus here, trying to help him make friends. You know how hard it can be for new students." Mr. Rodriguez looked between Tyler and Marcus, clearly sensing tension but having no proof of wrongdoing. "Well, that's nice of you, Tyler. Marcus, how are you settling in?" "Fine," Marcus managed, knowing that saying anything else would only make things worse for him later. "Good, good," Mr. Rodriguez nodded. "Well, you boys finish up your lunch. The bell's going to ring soon." As soon as the monitor moved away, Tyler's friendly mask dropped. "Smart move, keeping your mouth shut," he said quietly, so only Marcus could hear. "Wouldn't want to cause any trouble on your first month, would you?" The rest of lunch passed without incident, but Marcus could feel Tyler's eyes on him from across the cafeteria. He'd made an enemy, he realized, though he wasn't entirely sure how or why. All he'd wanted was to get through high school quietly, graduate, and move on with his life. But Tyler seemed determined to make that impossible. Over the next 2 weeks, the harassment escalated. Tyler and his friends would accidentally bump into Marcus in the hallways, knocking his books from his hands. They'd make jokes about his clothes, his glasses, his accent whenever teachers were within earshot, comments disguised as friendly ribbing that adults dismissed as harmless teenage banter. In gym class, Marcus found himself consistently picked last for teams, often ending up on Tyler's side, where he'd be ignored during games or deliberately left out of plays. During group projects in various classes, he'd be the odd one out, forced to work alone while other students paired off with friends. The worst part wasn't the direct confrontations, it was the isolation. Marcus began to understand how Tyler's influence worked throughout the school. Other students weren't necessarily cruel to him, but they weren't friendly either. It was as if Tyler had marked him as untouchable, and everyone else was smart enough to keep their distance. Marcus tried calling his grandmother back in New Mexico, hoping for guidance, but she only repeated her usual warnings about using his abilities responsibly. "Patience, mijo," she'd said during their last conversation. "Sometimes the universe tests us to see what we're made of. Remember, true strength isn't about what you can do to others. It's about who you choose to be when no one is watching." But patience was becoming harder to maintain, especially as Tyler seemed to grow bolder with each passing day. During fourth period English, Tyler would whisper insults just loud enough for Marcus to hear, but quiet enough that Mrs. Foster wouldn't notice. In the hallways between classes, Tyler's friends would form a barrier, forcing Marcus to push past them or take longer routes to his destinations. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in late October. Marcus had stayed after school to work on a chemistry project in the lab, hoping to avoid the usual chaos of the dismissal rush. The school was mostly empty, except for a few teachers and students involved in after-school activities. He was packing up his materials when Tyler, Jake, and Connor appeared in the doorway of the chemistry lab. Marcus's stomach dropped. He was alone, and there were no teachers around to intervene. "Well, well," Tyler said, strolling into the lab with his hands in his pockets. "Look what we have here, all alone and nowhere to run." Marcus continued packing his backpack, trying to project calm, even though his heart was racing. "I'm just finishing up," he said quietly. "I'll be out of your way in a minute." "Oh, you're not in our way," Tyler replied, his voice deceptively friendly. "Actually, we've been looking for you. We have a little proposition." Jake and Connor spread out slightly, blocking the lab's exits. Marcus realized he was trapped. "See, the thing is," Tyler continued, walking closer, "you've been at Jefferson High for over a month now, and you still don't seem to understand how things work around here. There's a social order, and everyone has their place." "I'm not looking for trouble," Marcus said, finally turning to face them. "But trouble found you anyway," Connor said with a laugh. Tyler nodded. "Connor's right. The problem is, you don't know your place yet, and that makes things uncomfortable for everyone." "What do you want?" Marcus asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. Tyler's grin widened. "What do I want? I want you to understand that this is my school. These are my friends, my teachers, my territory, and when someone new comes in and doesn't show proper respect..." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he nodded to Jake, who pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is going to be so good," Jake said, adjusting the angle of his camera. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you doing?" "Making a little movie," Tyler explained. "Something to help you remember this conversation. Don't worry, we'll make sure everyone at school gets to see it." Before Marcus could react, Connor grabbed his arms from behind, pinning them to his sides. Marcus struggled, but Connor was bigger and stronger, and the surprise had given him the advantage. "Let me go," Marcus demanded, but Tyler just laughed. "In a minute. First, we need to give you a little makeover." Tyler reached into his backpack and pulled out an electric razor. "See, I've been thinking about your look, and I realized what the problem is. Those bushy eyebrows make you look too serious, too intense. We need to lighten you up a bit." Marcus's eyes widened in horror as he realized what Tyler intended to do. "No, please don't. Hold him still," Tyler ordered Connor, who tightened his grip on Marcus's arms. The buzzing of the electric razor filled the chemistry lab as Tyler flicked it on. "This is going to look so good on social media," he said, approaching Marcus with the device. "Everyone's going to love seeing the new kid's makeover." Marcus struggled desperately, but Connor's grip was too strong. He felt the cold metal of the razor against his skin as Tyler began shaving off his left eyebrow, the dark hair falling to the floor in small clumps. "Perfect," Tyler exclaimed, stepping back to admire his work. "Much better. Now for the other one." As the razor approached his face again, something inside Marcus snapped. The tingling sensation he'd felt before returned, but this time it was different, stronger, more focused. His grandmother's lessons flooded back to him, not the warnings about restraint, but the older knowledge, the power that ran in his bloodline. "Stop," Marcus said, and his voice carried a strange resonance that made Tyler pause. "Or what?" Tyler challenged, but there was something uncertain in his expression now. Marcus looked directly at Tyler, and for the first time since arriving at Jefferson High, he didn't look away. His dark eyes seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and the temperature in the lab dropped several degrees. "You have no idea what you've just done," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying that same strange resonance. Tyler laughed, but it sounded forced. "What? Are you going to put a curse on me? Are you some kind of witch?" "Curandero," Marcus corrected, and as he spoke the word, he felt power flowing through him like electricity. "And you're about to learn what that means." He focused his energy, remembering his grandmother's teachings about the connections between all living things, about how hair and nails carried a person's essence, about how someone who knew the old ways could use that connection for healing, or for other purposes. Tyler raised the razor again, but as he did, Marcus spoke in a language none of them recognized, words his grandmother had taught him, ancient phrases passed down through generations of his family. The air in the lab seemed to vibrate with energy. "What the hell is he doing?" Connor asked nervously, his grip on Marcus's arms loosening slightly. Tyler tried to laugh it off, but his hand was shaking now. "He's just trying to freak us out. It's some kind of weird new kid trick." But as Marcus continued speaking, something strange began to happen. Tyler's perfectly styled blonde hair started to fall out in small clumps, just like Marcus's eyebrow hair had moments before. At first, Tyler didn't notice, too focused on maintaining his tough facade, but Jake's expression of horror made him look down. "Dude," Jake whispered, his phone still recording, "your hair." Tyler reached up to touch his head and came away with a handful of blonde strands. His eyes widened in shock and terror as more hair began falling, creating a small pile at his feet. "What did you do to me?" Tyler screamed, dropping the razor as he frantically tried to catch the falling hair. Marcus's voice grew stronger, the ancient words flowing from him with increasing power. Connor released his grip, stumbling backward in fear as he watched Tyler's hair continue to fall out in increasing quantities. "Make it stop!" Tyler begged, but Marcus wasn't finished. He turned his gaze to Jake, who was still holding his phone with shaking hands. "You wanted to record this?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying that otherworldly resonance. "Make sure you get it all." Jake's dark hair began falling out next, starting slowly but quickly accelerating. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering to the floor as he joined Tyler in frantically trying to catch the falling strands. Connor, seeing what was happening to his friends, turned to run, but Marcus's gaze found him before he could reach the door. "Where are you going?" Marcus asked calmly. "The show's not over yet." Connor's red hair started falling out in chunks, and he collapsed to his knees, sobbing as he watched himself going bald in real time. Within minutes, all three boys were completely hairless, not just on their heads, but their eyebrows and any other visible hair had vanished as well. They huddled together on the floor of the chemistry lab, looking like frightened, hairless creatures as they stared up at Marcus in terror. Marcus picked up Jake's phone from the floor, noting that it had recorded everything. He stopped the recording and looked down at the three boys who had tormented him for weeks. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice returning to normal but carrying an unmistakable authority. "You're going to leave me alone from now on. You're not going to bother me, talk to me, or even look at me unless absolutely necessary. You're going to tell everyone at school that this was some kind of accident. Maybe you tried to prank each other and it went wrong, but you're never ever going to tell anyone what really happened in this room." Tyler tried to speak, but only a strangled whimper came out. "And if you do," Marcus continued, "if you tell anyone about this, if you try to get revenge, if you so much as think about bothering me again, what happened to your hair will seem like a pleasant memory compared to what I'll do next time." He held up the phone. "This video is going to stay with me as insurance. It shows exactly what you did to me and what happened afterward. If anyone asks, you can tell them you were just trying to help me with a science experiment and something went wrong." Marcus gathered his things and walked toward the door, pausing to look back at the three bald boys huddled on the floor. "Oh, and Tyler," he said softly. "My grandmother always taught me that hair grows back, usually within a few months. But that depends on whether the person has learned their lesson or not. I guess we'll find out, won't we?" He left them there in the chemistry lab, bald and terrified, and walked out into the hallway with his head held high for the first time since arriving at Jefferson High. News of the hair incident spread through the school like wildfire over the weekend. By Monday morning, everyone had heard some version of the story. The official account, told by Tyler and his friends, was that they'd been experimenting with some kind of chemical mixture for a prank when something went wrong and caused their hair to fall out. They claimed it was just bad luck, a stupid accident that they deeply regretted. But there were whispers of other versions, rumors that someone had cursed them, that the new kid had somehow been involved, that there was more to the story than anyone was admitting. Marcus walked through the hallways that Monday morning to a very different reception than he'd grown accustomed to. Students stepped out of his way, not out of fear exactly, but out of respect. There were curious glances and whispered conversations, but no one bothered him. Tyler, Jake, and Connor were nowhere to be seen for the first few days. When they finally returned to school, they wore baseball caps pulled low over their heads and avoided eye contact with everyone, especially Marcus. Their behavior had changed completely. The swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous energy and a tendency to speak in hushed tones. Other students began approaching Marcus cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they realized he was nothing like the rumors suggested. He was quiet, yes, but also intelligent, funny when he wanted to be, and surprisingly knowledgeable about a wide range of subjects. Sarah Hoffman, a girl from his chemistry class, was the first to sit with him at lunch. "I hope you don't mind," she said, setting down her tray across from him. "I've been wanting to ask you about that molecular structure problem from last week." Soon, other students joined them. Alex Chen from his English class, Maria Santos from gym, David Kim from algebra. They formed an unlikely group of friends, united not by social status or shared interests, but by their mutual respect for someone who had stood up to the school's biggest bullies and won. Marcus's grandmother called him that weekend, and somehow she knew without being told what had happened. "You used the gift," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and concern. "I had to," Marcus replied. "They were humiliating me, recording it to show everyone. I couldn't let them—" "I know, mijo," she interrupted gently. "Sometimes the universe puts us in situations where we must choose between our principles and our survival. The important thing is what you do afterward." "Their hair is growing back," Marcus admitted. "Slowly, but it's growing." His grandmother chuckled. "Good. That means you remembered the most important lesson. Power without compassion is just cruelty. You could have made it permanent, couldn't you?" Marcus nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Yes. But you didn't. That's the difference between a curandero and a bruja, between a healer and someone who causes harm. You used only as much power as necessary to protect yourself, and no more." As the weeks passed, Jefferson High settled into a new equilibrium. Tyler and his friends kept to themselves. Their former reign of terror effectively ended. They weren't cruel to other students anymore, whether out of fear of retribution or genuine change of heart. Marcus wasn't sure, but the result was the same. Other students who had been targets of bullying before found their tormentors suddenly less interested in causing trouble. Word had spread through the school's underground network that there were consequences for cruelty, that the new kid possessed something that made crossing him inadvisable. Marcus found himself in an unusual position, respected but not feared, admired but not worshipped. He used his newfound influence carefully, never threatening anyone directly, but making it clear through his actions and presence that he stood with the underdogs, the outcasts, the students who needed protection. The chemistry lab, where everything had changed, became Marcus's favorite place in the school. Mrs. Patterson, who had been absent during the incident, never knew exactly what had happened there, but she noticed that her students seemed more respectful to each other, more careful with their words and actions. One afternoon, as Marcus worked alone on an extra credit project after school, Tyler appeared in the doorway. Marcus looked up calmly, feeling no fear this time. Tyler's hair had grown back to about an inch in length, making him look younger and less intimidating than before. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, fidgeting with his hands. Can I talk to you?" Tyler asked quietly. Marcus nodded, gesturing to a stool across from his lab table. Tyler sat down, staring at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally, "for what I did to you, for how I treated you. It was wrong." Marcus waited, saying nothing. "I don't understand what happened that day," Tyler continued. "I don't understand how you did what you did, and honestly, I don't want to know. But I've been thinking about it a lot, about why I targeted you in the first place." He looked up at Marcus for the first time since sitting down. I think I was threatened by you. You were different, and you didn't seem to care what anyone thought, and that scared me. I've spent so much time trying to fit in, trying to be what everyone expected me to be, that when I saw someone who didn't need that, I didn't know how to handle it." Marcus considered this for a moment. "You made my life miserable for weeks," he said quietly. "You humiliated me in front of the entire school." "I know," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know, and I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect us to be friends. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was." Marcus studied Tyler's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but saw only genuine remorse and fear. This wasn't the confident, cruel boy who had tormented him. This was someone who had been fundamentally changed by experiencing powerlessness for the first time in his life. "Your hair is growing back," Marcus observed. Tyler's hand went unconsciously to his head. "Yeah, slowly. The doctors don't understand what caused it. They keep running tests, but everything comes back normal. Maybe," Marcus said carefully, "it's growing back because you're learning to be a better person." Tyler's eyes widened slightly. "Does that mean, can you control it, whether it grows back or not?" Marcus smiled mysteriously. "What do you think?" Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "I think," he said finally, "that I never want to find out what happens to people who cross you twice." "Smart," Marcus agreed. "But Tyler, you don't have to be afraid of me. I'm not interested in revenge or in ruling this school the way you did. I just want to be left alone to live my life and help people when I can." Tyler nodded gratefully. "Thank you," he said, standing to leave. "And Marcus, if anyone ever gives you trouble again, if anyone tries to do to you what I did, they'll have to go through me first." Marcus was surprised by this offer. "Why?" "Because," Tyler said, pausing in the doorway, "I know what it feels like to be powerless now. I know what it feels like to be afraid and humiliated and alone. I never want to make anyone else feel that way again, and I sure as hell don't want to stand by and watch someone else do it." After Tyler left, Marcus sat alone in the chemistry lab, thinking about his grandmother's words about responsibility and compassion. He had used his gifts to protect himself, and in doing so, he had not only changed his own life, but had apparently changed Tyler as well. As the months passed, Jefferson High became a different place. The culture of bullying that had thrived under Tyler's influence began to fade, replaced by something more inclusive and respectful. Students who had been afraid to speak up before found their voices. Those who had been isolated began to form friendships. Marcus never revealed the full extent of his abilities to anyone at school, but his reputation as someone not to be trifled with remained strong. More importantly, he became known as a protector, someone who would stand up for others who couldn't stand up for themselves. His grandmother visited him that spring, and as they walked through the halls of Jefferson High together, she nodded approvingly at what she saw. "You have learned the most important lesson," she told him as they sat together in the chemistry lab where everything had changed. "Power is not about what you can do to others. It's about who you choose to become when you have the ability to make a difference." Marcus looked around the lab, remembering that terrifying afternoon when 3 bullies had tried to humiliate him, and how their cruelty had awakened something inside him that changed everything. "I used to think the hardest part would be learning to control the gift," he said to his grandmother. "But the hardest part is knowing when to use it and when to show restraint." She smiled at him, her eyes twinkling with pride. "That, mijo, is why the gift chose you. Not everyone who has the power also has the wisdom to use it well." As his senior year approached, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that October afternoon. He had friends now, real friends who valued him for who he was rather than what he could do to their enemies. He had the respect of his classmates and teachers. Most importantly, he had learned that true strength wasn't about the power to destroy, but about the wisdom to know when to fight and when to forgive. Tyler kept his word, becoming an unlikely ally who used his social influence to protect other vulnerable students. Jake and Connor, shaken by their experience, had become quieter, more thoughtful versions of themselves. The 3 of them never spoke directly about what had happened in the chemistry lab, but the memory of that afternoon hung over them like a constant reminder of the consequences of cruelty. On graduation day, as Marcus walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he caught sight of Tyler in the audience, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Their eyes met for a moment, and Tyler nodded, a gesture of respect and gratitude that spoke volumes. Marcus nodded back, understanding that sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying your enemies, but transforming them into better people. His grandmother had been right all along. True power lay not in what you could take from others, but in what you could help them become. As he looked out at his classmates and teachers, at the school that had once felt like a battlefield but had become a community, Marcus knew that he had learned something far more valuable than any lesson from a textbook. He had learned that standing up for yourself didn't require becoming someone you weren't proud of, and that the strongest magic of all was the transformation that happened when someone chose to use their power to protect rather than to harm. The quiet kid who had once sat alone in the back of the chemistry lab was gone, replaced by a young man who understood both his strength and his responsibility. And as he stepped into his future, Marcus carried with him the knowledge that true victory wasn't about making others fall. It was about helping everyone rise.